How's it going? David from Comic Book Investments. So yeah, CGC lost one of our boxes. Yes, an entire submission, totally gone. I've just been so busy with other things, with the auction happening and stuff like that. I haven't had a chance to do this video, and it's come to its full conclusion. So I was going to do a video talking about how they lost and all this kind of stuff, but I figured I'd wait until the whole thing happened and it was all over, and then I could talk about the resolution, what happened at the end of it. But they pretty much lost an entire box. Thankfully, it was just modern comic books, the modern tier. And it wasn't like something like our walkthroughs or whatever they call it now, unlimited, whatever, express, whatever they call it. So thankfully it was just that box because those end up being a lot cheaper. It wasn't like I was using Fantasy 15s and, Hulk ones, action ones, all the action ones I sent. But yeah, so they lost the box. Well, so what happened? Basically we sent in our stuff and they shipped us, we sent in hundreds of books a month. And so they shipped us everything else in that entire order. We shipped once a month, and they shipped us every other box in that order. But one box was missing. And so we're like, okay, why isn't this box here? All the other boxes here, we looked, and it says shipped. And we're like, interesting. We look at the tracking, and the tracking shows that it went to a completely different state, far, far, far away from us, not even the same thing. We're like, okay, did they put the wrong label on it or something like that? And the label did say our name. We didn't put our business name, we put our personal name. And so we're like, that's weird. So then we contact CGC, and of course, every single time, I don't even know, you ever call customer service and they're always typing something like, I'm just writing this stuff down so, so people can follow along what's going on. So if it goes from one hand to the next and the next, everyone can kind of read the notes. I don't think they actually ever do write anything down because every single time we called, we would have to tell them the entire story all over again. And then they'd be like, oh, let me look into that. I'll get back to you later today or the next day. So then later the day or the next day would happen. No response, no nothing. So then we call again, and they're like, oh, yes, writing the stuff down, just putting my notes in. So for the next person, and I'll look into it, get back to it. And then you call again. And every single time you get someone different because they probably have multiple customer service reps. But pretty much they lost the box. What happened was they shipped it to the wrong person with the same name. But it's weird. That box was in our other order. So I don't know how that got confused. Sometimes I don't understand CGC. Sometimes the labels are different. Like they'll say first appearance of so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. You'd think that would be automatic. That it would just be in there. Everything would just be in there. Like their system. You type in, Giant Size X-Men #1. It'll automatically just say the same thing every single time. I don't know. I'm hoping they have that now, but on multiple occasions, they'll have something different. And I'm like, do they manually type this in, or is this an error? Nonetheless, so we would call them. We're like, hey, why was it shipped to whatever state it was shipped to? Why was it shipped to this state, not here? Can you get it back? And then they're like, oh, because at the time it was on its way there. So like the first time we called. And so then they're like, okay, we'll call FedEx. Nothing. So then they're like, oh, you have to call FedEx. So we called FedEx, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, the actual person that sent it is the only one that can do it. So then we called CGC over and over and over again. Like, look, you have to call them and get this, returned to us. And by the time they got back to us, it was too late. They was already delivered. So then I'm like, well, can you call the customer that you delivered to that wasn't us? And they're like, yeah. And of course, I'm saying this within like seconds apart. This was days, if not weeks apart, that we would hear from CGC. It would just be like, we call them, no response. Like, hey, you better hurry up. Like, tracking showing it's going to get delivered. You better ask it to be rerouted before it gets delivered. Nope, sorry. They never responded to us, so it got delivered to that place. Okay, now we're calling and like, hey, we need you to, because every time we call, we get someone on the line, and we tell them this thing, and then they're like, okay, we'll look into it and get back to you. And then they never would until we call the next day. We're like, look, it's about to be delivered. You better hurry up. And they're like, yeah, we'll look into it, call back. And then it'll be delivered. And then I'm like, well, it's delivered now. Can you have the person send it to us or somehow get it back? We'll look into it. Nothing. So it's constantly us calling them listening to us, writing down whatever notes they needed to write down, and then doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then we would call them again, And then we'd have to tell the whole story all over again. And then they'd be like, it was almost like the same response. Oh, yeah, we'll look into it, blah, blah, blah. And nothing, every single time. Frustrating. So we went through this for weeks, probably even months. And then finally, we got a resolution. Finally, the resolution was like, they looked into it. They realized they were in the wrong. Duh. And then they're like, okay, we'll go with insurance. So then we had to deal with their insurance the entire time. But thankfully, that part wasn't as bad as normally dealing with insurance was. CGC pretty much took care of everything. I don't know what they did on their end, but pretty much the resolution was, I think it was probably like a 2-month turnaround time, if I can remember correctly. Anyways, they basically sent us a check for the value of the comics. Now, you might be thinking, well, what is the value of the comics? Well, it's not that exactly the value of the comics. It's the value that you wrote down to get insured. So whenever you fill out something, you will write down the value of the comic. That is not technically the value of the comic. That's value of what you want it insured for. So if you write down a comic book and you're like, oh, if it's a 9.6, it's worth $50. If it's a 9.8, it's worth $300. You might write $300. It might actually get a grade of a 9.4, so I mean it's like $40. But the value of the comic was insured for $300. So we got our money. I think it was like $4,700 is what we got back in the form of a check, cashed it, all good. Nothing there. We added up the value of everything because they posted the grades. We looked at everything. Some we lost money on, some we gained money. Overall, I think if we would have sold every single book in there, I think we would have came away with I think it was probably valued at like $5,500, maybe $6,000, something like that. But then you factor in fees. Like let's say we sold most of them on eBay. You factor in fees, you're losing money on there. Even though we sell on our website, but still, eBay is still huge. So we still sell a bunch on eBay as well. And then you factor in the fact that it's going to take months, if not years, to sell all this stuff. So in the end, I think we ended up, I would say we came ahead if you factor in the time. So maybe they should just lose more of our boxes and this pay us outright. I mean, technically didn't lose it. Someone just gained a box. And yeah, they just probably, oh, sweet, I got a box of comics I'd never even sent before and came from CGC. Well, I guess they're all mine. So yeah, so some other random person with the same name as us got a box of comics. How this is even a thing, because, we have a pretty common name. I don't know how CGC could make such an error, but they did. But they covered it, so no fault. No fault there. I think, like I said before, I think we kind of came ahead if you factor in all that kind of stuff. But it was just like a weird fiasco. I've had them. This wasn't the worst one. The worst one, I did a whole video about how they lost like $100,000 worth of stuff. Oh man, that was horrible because they lost $100,000 worth of items. This was like an entire shipment that we sent to them. They couldn't find it. We called, same thing. Oh, we're looking into it. Let me get back to you. And then you just have to keep calling. They would never reach out to us and be like, hey, we figured it out. It was always us calling them, trying to it's kind of like, when you're in a relationship and you're the one always trying and the other one isn't doing anything. But in this case, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up into it. So you kind of have to try. Normally, if you just like, hey, I'm not going to try as hard anymore in this relationship, the relationship falls apart. But this is like, I kind of need this relationship to work because you're the ones that have my comic books. So yeah, the $100,000 one, I did a video, but it was horrible. They couldn't find the package. And that's worse because if they can't find the package, we couldn't get insurance. And they're like, I don't know where it is. And it took a couple months for them to figure out where it was. They're like, oh, someone put it over here. I'm like, what? How is that our fault? Don't you have some kind of system? I don't know. I really don't know what kind of systems they have. Hearing how my dad said behind the scenes at CBCS, I wouldn't be surprised if CGC has bad systems as well. Just, you think these companies, are worth millions and billions of dollars. CGC parent company bought out for $500 million. You think they would have these, you just walk in there and it's just like everyone's perfectly in line and in sync and everything's just going perfectly planned. But I feel like it's kind of like a Mickey Mouse thing over there. you go behind the curtain, you're like, oh, geez. But nonetheless, got stuff, got the money for it. So just found an interesting story. I'm sure most people of you out there would panic, but like I said, we send in so many stuff, but this is just another box of tons of other boxes that we get. So, and to me personally, since it was a bunch of replaceable stuff, I hate it when things are not replaceable. This is a bunch of stuff that, is so common, just so common, that even if it did get lost, even if we lost the money, it wouldn't be, the money would suck, but the fact that those books, let's say they got lost or thrown away or something like that, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because they're so replaceable. It's one thing if you lose something that's like not replaceable. Like I remember I had this one book. It was, I want to say a Marvel Mysteries. I don't remember what number it was. And it would have been the single highest grade. There was no like 9.0s or 9.2s over it. This is a 7.5 or an 8.0 or something. It would have been the highest grade. This was at the time. And the person, I bought it from eBay, they taped the book to the cardboard. Not the book in the bag and backboard, the actual book. So when I get it in, now it's sloshed around, so some of the tape had already pulled some of the cover off. And the other tape, I'm like looking at this, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And I explained to him, I was like, look, yeah, I know I'm going to get my money back through eBay because you shipped it terribly. But that's not the point. The point is you ruined what would have been the single highest grade, and you can't replace that. There is no replacing that. There's none. There's none. Like, this is not like a 1.0 or, let's say, an Ultimate Fallout 4 number in a 9.8 or a 9.6 or 9.4 or any grade. There's tons of them. Tons. So very replaceable. Oh well, you damaged that book. There's tons more. But this is the single highest grade. You can't replace this. You can't get another single highest grade of this book. Like, you get a lower grade, sure. It's even rare in a lower grade, but yeah, that's why I hate. Anyways, have a great day.